Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to everyone, fellow participants and listeners for the ICSGCE 2022 conference held in Kuala Lumpur. So I'm Effendi Yaakob from University Putra Malaysia, Serdang, Malaysia. I'll be sharing some of the research output on the title Tropical Field Observation of Weed Permanent Shading on Solar PV Surface, Solar Photovoltaic Surface. So I'll be sharing some of the concern and some of the issue related to weed impact on large-scale solar PVs. So this work is actually under the integrated nexus of green energy, which is the solar, land resources, which is the space underneath the solar, and also for the agriculture, which is integrating high value herbal crops. So this is actually we have received the first Malaysia Book of Record on the largest herbal agrivoltaic cultivation for natural cooling mechanism in May 2022. Just recently received the first record for the Malaysia Book of Records. So we have planted 25,000 units of misai kucing crops directly underneath solar PV panels for the cooling mechanism. For the paper which we are presenting now is basically referring to the shading. Cloud movement, especially thick cloud near to Earth's surface, creates a permanent shading, a non-permanent shading on solar PV farms, which is critically discussed in the solar PV research. It reduces significantly in terms of the DC generation. Improper weed management in large-scale solar creates a permanent shading. As compared to the cloud movement, it is a non-permanent, but if we are referring to the weed crawling on top of the solar, it is a permanent shading to the PV surface, especially with the creeping plants. Thus, this work implies freely available application, which is the PlantNet and Canopio, to analyze the impact of weed surface covering the solar on top of the solar surface, in large-scale solar farms. Image of specified weed growing above the solar PV surface are captured and identified using the PlantNet application, because the PlantNet has a very large database on weed, the type of weed and the species. Weed identification is the first stage of efficient weed management to aid in the fundamental understanding of the life cycle and biology of the weed. If we know what type of weed, then we can do some mitigation approach to make sure that the weed can be mitigated, in terms of the issue can be solved. The same image are used in Canopio application to determine the surface coverage by means of core rod sampling. So the same picture which we snap in the solar farm, we use in another apps, which is the Canopio, to know what is the coverage, the surface coverage of the weed on top of the solar surface. From there, we can know what are the coverage area and then the impact in terms of the DC reduction. So this information and some overview is invaluable to solar operators, showing the significant energy reduction when the solar PV is covered by weeds. Okay, some of the keywords is agrivoltaic system, Canopio, PlantNet, PV surface, and weed management. So agrivoltaic is actually an integration between two industry, which is the solar industry or solar activities, and also the agriculture activities. So two in one, in the same space. So why it is important? Because of the land use, the issue of the land use, because when we are referring to the solar PV system, is very large. 1 acre, 1 megawatt peak system is approximately 4 to 5 acres of land, depending on the land surface and the condition on ground. So it is important for us to integrate these activities, which is the agriculture and the solar, to optimize the land use. Yeah. So this paper refers to the important problem or the critical issue, especially in the solar performance, which is the shading. So the phenomenon of shading is complex. Varying shade can be produced by haze, by cloud, dust, trees, bird droppings, building, and rooftop structures. Differential angle and orientation might also result in various shading patterns depending on the location of the installation. So it is a very critical issue which we are doing some work on the shading. Various studies covers dust, covers the trees, covers the bird droppings and whatnot, but ours is actually referring to the weed management growing from the ground side on top of the solar PV. So the solar cell classification starts from the first generation, starting from the crystalline, from the silicon cells, and then second generation of amorphous cadmium, and then goes to the third and fourth, which covers the organic, the perovskite, the SSC, and whatnot. So it is emerging in terms of the material, PV materials. Some overview of the agrivoltaic. It is being discussed and being researched worldwide. As for example, in the US, in the Europeans, in Europeans, Italy, France, in the UK, and also Australia. So a lot of developed countries are going deep on agrivoltaic and also giving some huge grant. For example, in the US, they are giving huge grant to study on the impact, study on the approach and procedures of agrivoltaic in large-scale solar farms. So why it is important for us to study in terms of the weed, so in UPM, we have developed a program called Agrivoltaic for LSS, UPM Initiative towards a sustainable solar industry in Malaysia. So we are actually referring to what is the impact of the weed on top of the solar in terms of the shading. So when we are talking about weed, it creates two major problems, which is the first is in terms of the vertebrates, the rodents, the rats, snakes, which damages the communication cables, which is very important for the operation of the solar farm. The second one is in terms of the permanent shading. You see here, as shown in the figure here, this is a real picture. One of our site in Puchong, Selangor. It is a real picture showing various types of weed crawling from the ground on top of the solar panels. So it is very critical. Although the solar farm has a maintenance schedule, but when we are talking about the growth of the weed, especially during rainy season, so it is very very fast growing weeds, and it crawls on top, and then it grows for a larger surface cover. So based on these two, the rodents and the permanent shading, it creates some issue at site. For example, burn inverters in terms of the earthing and whatnot, cable faults, bushfires. This happens in our site also, bushfires, and also some of the site in Australia. Soil erosion because of the heavy rains, soil erosion, permanent shading, which we are discussing now, and some other related issues related, in the solar farms. So by implementing agrivoltaic, it can mitigate risk worth more than 4 million RM occurrences with reduction in OPEX. So it is actually a benefit approach to the solar operators because they can reduce the risk of damages. So this is basically some elements of some overview of impact of the shading. For example, if a module is being shaded, a field study conducted by Golami, the impact in terms of the impact of dust. So Golami is studying on the dust. Also same approach, which is covering the surface. A significant reduction of 21.47% in the DC power was analyzed. So by only the dust factor, it creates a significant reduction in the DC. The finding shows reduction in efficiency equal to 11.86% with the where this finding reduction in power and efficiency were caused by decreasing the short circuit current. So by the impact of shade is actually in terms of the short circuit current to the overall circuit of the solar PV. Solar PV panels are made up of a number of cells that are wired in series. Thus, a shaded cell produces significantly less current than an unshaded one. So the configuration of the series and parallel depends on the orientation and the site. So where if the string is connected in series, so shaded module can give great impact in terms of DC reduction. So the method what we are doing now is actually capturing some images using precise camera, and then from there, from the image, we convert and then we get some data from the application, PlantsNet and Canopio. The image is specified with growing above the solar PV surface are captured and identified using PlantsNet and also using Canopio for the surface cover. These are some of the example of the picture we have taken at Puchong solar site. Based on PlantsNet results shown in figure 9, see here, figure 9, this is some of the picture taken. It shows that the creeping weed on top of the solar module face is most likely from Micania micracunt, which is a type of climbing hempweed under the species of compositae. So I'm not agronomist, but I think my pronunciation is correct. Where it gives a similarity of the picture is compared with the database in the PlantsNet. They have a huge database for weeds around the world. So this image is being compared one-to-one with the database, and from there the application will give a similarity index. For example, for the first picture here, figure 9 here, so it shows that Micania width is most likely the same with our picture in covering the solar PV surface. And then the next one is Annona carimola mill, shown figure here. So it is a very huge plant. It is not creeping, but it grows from ground on top of the solar. Through this, normally the weeds or the plants comes out between the panels. So normally for the solar PV installation, they will have openings between panels to make sure that if there is erosion and whatnot, it will not damage each other. So from the opening here, so the plant will comes out, and then from there it will create shading to the solar surface because the sun is on top, and then the plant covers the surface area. So based on this, the second figure, the same it identifies Annona carimola mill, okay, which is a species of edible fruit bearing plant in the genes of Annona from the family of Annonaceae. The fruit tree grows heavily, spreading out from between PV module gap in solar PV Puchong, our site. This tree will not only create permanent shading, but it will also damage the solar PV structures if it is not properly cut and maintained, because the stump, the plants, it will grow very huge, and then it will push the modules, the solar modules, further away. So it will damage the PV module itself. So it is very dangerous, and then it will cost it will incur very high cost in terms of the maintenance and repair works for the solar. So from this analysis, it shows that for the Annona, it only carries around 37%. Although it is very low, but from the information we can know that the most likely what are the type and what are the impact of the growth of the growth of the plants. So it will damage the solar modules. So from there, we go for the second round of analysis using the same picture, using the same image which we snap using the Canopio. The canopy coverage area on top of the solar module exceed 59%. So based on our figure, it is basically a quadratic approach. So based on that, we see that the coverage area on the solar surface by the width is around 60% covered, and it will grow very fast because it is a growing weed, especially during the rainy season. So based on this, it gives very high impact in terms of the DC generation, because if the surface is covered 60%, so I believe that the reduction of DC more than half in terms of the overall generation of the solar. So some field measurement are done manually by measuring the quadrant lining, which shows similar result of approximately 35 shaded quadrant. So we have done two approach. One is in terms of the picture by quadrant, and then we measure for each cell. See here, we measure the length and the width of each cell, and then we compare with the result. So it shows similar value of percentage covered. Okay, so we go both. One is in terms of practically measure the coverage, and also using the image and then upload to the Canopio application. So it shows that it is very critical for the solar operator to make sure that the width is properly maintained. If not, it will cover 60% is very high. It's very high. It will reduce significantly in terms of the DC generation. So this work shares some some critical information in terms of the weed identification approach in large-scale solar PV farms, where ground vegetation, especially the creeping weeds, will create a great monetary loss, the cash reduction, where the DC generation will be reduced significantly. Previous studies have supported the fact that partial shading does reduce conversion efficiency, which significantly reduces the power generation. But in this case, the width surface coverage is really critical because it is a permanent shading to the solar PV operation, and the growth rate can be exponentially uncontrollable, especially during the rainy season, where in Malaysia we have a lot of rainy season throughout the year. It is suggested that large-scale solar operators would benefit from the outcomes of this work, with some emphasis on efficient weed management to aid in the fundamental understanding of the life cycle and biological of the weed to properly maintain or control measures of the weed. So agrivoltaic is actually covering the scope whereby we maintain the ground vegetation, and at the same time we optimize the space use for agriculture. So I think that is all from my side. Hopefully it can be beneficial and give good information, a new knowledge to the solar industry, the solar researcher, and also the agriculture side. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.